Do models and fashion designers care about the people who make their clothes? Is it part of their job to consider others who are also involved in the apparel manufacturing process? What is the current role of government in addressing social and environmental concerns, and what should its role be?
Well, there.
I know that's a pretty involved question if you guys need a moment to
chime in on one part of this because it's
Sure.
related to something that I'm currently working on, which is the role of government in addressing social and environmental concerns. It varies depending on where you live in the world, and I think this is one place where consumers or voters can make a big difference in the US. Making wise choices about who we elect will affect policy, and that's an important thing to change. The other half of this question is out of my realm completely, so I'll leave that to others.
Sure, thank you.
I'd like to jump in a little bit here about the addressing the government role. We do a couple different things. We set up rules and then we decide to follow them. And the current administration has decided not to follow rules that are in place. The Department of Commerce has relaxed its ruling on what is considered to be made in America. Now the razor rule stands in effect, which means as long as there's a significant transformation of goods that occurs, and it occurs in the United States, that you can label it made in America. So for example, there are apparel companies here in the United States where the fabrics are made in China. They come from Chinese or Indian fiber. They are sent to the United States where they're dyed. Then they're laser cut and returned to China for sewing. And upon that point, they are sewn in with labels that say made in the United States. The same thing happens with razor blades that are made down in Mexico. They're made in Texas. And then the razor blades are shipped right across the border where the handles are made, the packaging is made, it is all assembled together, and made in America is put on the label and shipped right back to the United States. So it's the loopholes that exist in government that we have to be aware of. As of this morning, the EPA was rolling back requirements and fines for violations. So as a manufacturer in the United States, if you were on the verge of being a polluter and now you are continuing that same behavior, you most likely will not be fined or even recognized for those behaviors. So it's on the consumer to understand what those companies are doing and to do research themselves to support companies that they believe in. You don't have to research every brand and you don't have to research everything that you're going to buy, but find something that you care about, research that one, and then support that brand as much as possible. And I think that when we look at models and fashion designers, that we're seeing more input coming from them. We're seeing a lot more sustainable brands popping up. Some of them may be considered greenwashed or partially sustainable, but in general, they're following some rule or some ethos that they're wanting to support. So it always rolls back to one person, the consumer. They set the tone, they set the energy, and where the industry is going to go.
Thank you, Skye.
If I might add just something to that, is models have very little to do with the decision-making process about apparel. Fashion designers have more, particularly about materials choices, but there's somebody left out of this equation, and that is the business management, the owners of companies. If you set out a course to really use ethical, sustainable practices and make that part of a business model, that's a business management decision, and they're not listed in this question, but that's a key way to know that you're buying something that's produced according to certain standards, as much as you trust that company. So I just wanted to tail on what Skye was saying.
Thank you. Are we ready to move on to our next question, or do we have any other thoughts from our panelists?
Well, what should the role be? I have a very good opinion about that. Its role should be hands-on, deep into sustainability, and there should not be a thing made in the United States that isn't sustainable. There's no reason for us to be making throwaway, discarded objects when we can look at a supply chain, design a product to have a second life, and then make partnerships with other companies so they can take the waste or the salvage from the manufacturing process and turn it into an ancillary supply chain, turning waste into profit. And if enough companies partnered together, and it was required by government to have that when you're setting out for a business plan or you're applying for licensing, if you're going for a certification or a regulation, there should be an oversight there that says, as a company in the United States, you should be taking care of the downstream effects and pay attention to those. So in my opinion, they should be hands-on.
Yes, Kathleen, you're still muted. Oh.
If I could, just one last thing. We relied, and I don't want to get too deeply into politics, but we relied on regulatory change from the prior administration to clean up a lot of issues and problems. And the problem with relying on that is that they can be changed by the next administration. What we actually need are laws that will last, that support sustainable practice. So the other piece is not to rely on regulatory change, but to rely on legislation passed by Congress. Right now, there's not one decent effort to do this. It's going to have to come from political pressure from consumers that this is something that people want, just like some of the environmental protections that were gotten in the 70s came from consumers pushing for them. Because relying on regulatory change will have this exact same thing happen, which is we had good laws in place by regulators and they were undone by the Trump administration. So it's not sustainable.
That's a really good distinction. Thank you.